All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Religious Coffee Hour. My name is Hunter Malott, and we are very honored and privileged and excited to be able to interview Jim Woodford on the show today. Jim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for our listeners?
Hello, Hunter. Thank you for having me. And hello to everyone out there. Um, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with Hunter and, of course, with you today, and to um, talk mainly about, I guess, the experience that I went through that dramatically changed my life. Um, I will try to be concise, but I promise you'll be home for dinner. Um, give you a little background first. I'm speaking to you from Canada. I'm Canadian. Um, and I I was born in the province of Newfoundland, which is quite far east and north. Matter of fact, if you jump high enough, you could see Ireland. Just kidding. But I grew up in a remote area, and where we lived um, back in those days, we were serviced by seaplanes in the summer, and or float planes in the summer, ski planes in the winter. And so very quickly, I got an introduction as a young boy to aviation. And because the dock was close to where we lived, where the planes came in, um, I would often be there and just falling in love with aviation. And so in 1967, I'm 76 now, in 1967, uh, I and we were very poor. My father died when I was only 2 years old, so my mom was widowed and she was only in her 20s. But I had a wonderful mom, and my grandparents were wonderful people, and we lived with them. So I grew up in the bush, so to speak, and fell in love, as I said, with aviation, and dreamed that I would go to work in the local pulp mill and save enough money over 10 years to go to flying school. But my mom, God bless her, I think most mothers know the yearning in their child's hearts. And my mom was determined to find a way, and she did. And someone kindly offered to lend her the money to send me to flying school. So in 1967, about the time of the Vietnam War, I went to flying school and and loved it, and couldn't wait to fly everything I could get my hands on. And I graduated about a year later, and it's interesting. People say you've had an exciting life. I don't view it that way, Hunter. I just there's a lot to be said for being in the right place at the right time. And during the Vietnam War, when many of the senior pilots in the United States Airlines were, taking part in the war effort, um, many of the senior pilots in Canada at that time went down to replace the jobs that were open. And so for young fellows like me, it was in the right place at the right time. I had about six job offers, and the week I graduated. But I wanted to stay where I could get some practical experience, so I stayed in the bush doing what bush pilots do, and flying and so on. So at that time, there were, as I said, plenty of job opportunities, and so I paid my dues, so to speak, by flying in the Northwest Territories and in Labrador and northern Canada, and flying otter and beaver and on floats and skis, and eventually worked my way up to twin engine water bomber, and did that for a couple of seasons. And then I saved enough money to go to Vero Beach, Florida, where I got my jet rating. And the minute I had that, I had all kinds of job offers, including from Europe. And so I ended up taking a position with a company in England. Um, and they ran a large freight operation. So they did. they did haul passengers as well on charter, but our main business was flying large equipment to remote areas. And so they had very diversified equipment, including some Russian aircraft that could haul very heavy equipment. And so I went from being someone that had never been farther than 100 miles from my home to suddenly being in Europe, and their customers were all over the world. So when I look at my logbook now, I've been in about 52 countries, and
Wow.
it was quite an experience. And so I've always enjoyed flying different aircraft, much as you would enjoy driving different cars. And it's interesting. That really adds a lot to your resume if you have a lot to do with sort of these old type freighters and
Hmm.
so on. So I came up through that era when there was still a lot of propeller driven aircraft around,
Hmm.
and in the larger aircraft, and yeah, it was interesting. And so
No.
I won't bore you with the some of the experiences that I had as a pilot. Suffice it to say that although I wasn't uh, a praying guy at the time, I did have a good education. I went to Catholic school,
Hmm.
and I was taught by the nuns and the Irish Christian Brothers,
Hmm.
and I still have a fridge magnet that says I survived the nuns, but I'm just kidding. They were wonderful people. They really were. But they were they were tough. But you learned. So anyway, it. But like most young people, when you start your career, I think that you feel almost bulletproof, and God was not a big part of my life.
Hmm.
Um, but so I had an interesting uh, career, I guess. Um,
So obviously you're a believer now, but you mentioned that you had maybe some semblance of belief, but you weren't, as you put it, a praying man. Do you say that that you did have a belief in God, but it wasn't practical belief. It didn't really affect your life, but sort of just with your mind you believed, but it wasn't really with your heart.
oh yes, I believe there was a God.
Uh huh.
Absolutely, I was not agnostic. Um, I suppose, like most people, Hunter, I hoped and prayed. I didn't pray, but I hoped that someone was in charge of the chaos. And it's interesting. I look back on those long uh, night flights over the South China Sea, where you can't see. There's a period of about an hour and a half where you see no lights on Earth at all because you're that far from land, and you can't even on those long flights at night. Um, um, and you can't even tell where the stars begin and the sky ends, um, and until you make radio contact. And but I would hope people say to me, "Didn't you even think about God in those days?" No, I'm not going to lie about that. I don't lie, but I hoped there was a God that was everything. I mean, growing up as a young boy in Catholic school, the focus was, not just your schooling, but your faith. And I was an altar boy for 8 years. I could still recite the Latin Mass, Confiteor Deo Omnipotenti, Beata Maria Summa Virgine. So I had a good grounding in it. And I had a wonderful mom and grandmother who they made sure, I got to church every Sunday and that sort of thing. And in a little town, not unlike a little town in Ohio. The church kind of revolved, or the community revolved around the church. It was a strong Catholic area, and but like many young people, you get out and you're experiencing life and so on. So it seemed that everything I touched worked out well, and I can't say it was because of my own incredible abilities or anything, but I look back now, Hunter, with this understanding of God through the experience I had. And I realize now that even then he had his hand on my life. But in my arrogance, uh, because no matter what happened with the airplanes, I always seemed to come out on top. And it was the beginning of the computer industry in the 80s. And I would meet people on charter flights that, were top executives. And I quickly began to realize that, boy, this is something worth investing in. And I was doing well. I not only did I fly for airlines, but I did charter work as well. And so I invested my money wisely, and it certainly paid off getting in on the ground floor of something like Apple.
Wow.
So I was blessed. As a matter of fact, my nickname, Hunter, was Diamond Jim, because whatever I flew well, and whatever I flew paid a lot of money. And the companies that I would invest in, and then eventually even own some companies of my own, all seemed to do well. My theory was buy them, pump some money into them, keep them for 3 years, and sell them. And it was a good formula.
Hmm.
So, as I said, my nickname was Diamond Jim. Everything I touched turned to diamonds. And little did I know that I would reach a point in my life where I would receive the ultimate challenge,
Sure.
death.
Yeah.
And but for right up until 2014, when this event happened, um, I led a charmed life. I really did, and I realize now. I think it was God preparing me for the real reason I was created.
Sure.
And I say that with all modesty. I mean, we're all created for a purpose. The
Yes.
trick is knowing what the purpose is that God has for you and not deviating from it. And I just didn't know. I think I think that God had to hit me up the side of the head with a 2x4 before I paid attention, and or hit me up the side of the head with a coffin, and that got my attention.
Yeah.
So life was good, and I met Lorraine, my wife, and fell madly in love with her, and she, interestingly enough, was had a very, very strong faith in God. And why she picked me, I'll never know, because I was the poster child for lost cases. But she
Well,
did.
Jim,
And
we are just we're so thankful and so happy to be able to have you on the show today. I did want to mention real quickly before we get into your personal story. Um, I first encountered your story through the reading of this book, and I'm going to try to hold it up. I don't know if it might be backwards in the recording by
no,
the
it's
time we
it's
release
it's
this.
good. I'm reading it. Yeah, and that's by
Okay,
two
good.
two good friends of mine, Randy Kay
Yeah,
and Sean Tabbitt, and
yeah.
they're wonderful Christian men that are really bringing the near-death experience into the mainstream, both
Mm-hmm.
through their books and through their ministry, Randy Kay Ministries.
Yeah.
Sean is an executive with Destiny Image,
Mm-hmm.
who coincidentally are the publishers of my book out of Shippensburg, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And so they're great people, and
Yeah.
they're doing a lot of good work.
Well,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed their book, and when I read your story in there, I was just kind of taken away and taken back and just fascinated. And you mentioned near death experiences, and something I want to talk about for a moment. Um, Near death experiences and the study of them, really, as you said, are becoming more and more mainstream now, and for good reason. I always like to emphasize the fact that although they are just now being discovered in a sense with for a lot of people, um, they're certainly, they go back to the beginnings of time. I mean, even in the Bible, we see that the Apostle Paul in Second Corinthians wrote about the fact that I believe he had a near death experience because he says there in chapter 13, I know a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, but was called up to
Yes.
paradise. And I personally believe that he's talking about himself, and he's talking about the time when he died, when he was stoned at Lystra, and the Lord took his spirit up, and I, so I think it's an interesting thing to think about and talk about, and I think that God chooses, um, and can choose if He so wills, to reveal certain things to others, that He may not reveal to everyone, if that makes sense, and for His good purposes and His good will. And so I am very excited to be able to get into this today. Now, one quick question I want to ask you before we get into your personal story. Are you a coffee drinker?
I am.
Good. Well, this is the religious coffee hour, so I always ask people if they drink coffee or not. If you didn't, we might have to disfellowship you, but we always appreciate a good coffee drinker on the show. So
Absolutely. If I don't have 2 cups a day, I'm just not right.
there you go. All right, Jim. Well, why don't you go ahead and take us from sort of the beginning? The day a lot of what you spoke about happened to you, where you were, what you're doing, and some of
Yeah.
the events that led up to that
Let,
moment.
let, yeah. Let me, if I may, just comment for a moment on the NDE
Sure.
thing. Um, I have now spoken to somewhere in the vicinity of between 200,000 and 300,000 people. And I mention that only because something amazing happens. I have had uh, people come up to me very shy, uh, very hesitant after I'm speaking, and I always stay and answer all the questions people have for me. I think that's important to be transparent because we all know there are people that claim they have these experiences and they do not. But who am I to say they didn't? I mean, but we all know there are people that are just doing this to create an income stream for themselves. And one of the things I like to point out to people is I'm fortunate. I had a good career. I shouldn't be spending my retirement years beating the trails, but this is for God. And I'll reference this at the end of the program because I was told to do this. And you don't say no to Jesus. You just don't. You may think you can, but you won't. I want everyone to know, even the skeptics and even the atheists that may be watching, everyone, everyone someday talks to God. Everyone.
Amen.
The news may not be good that he has for you, but that's your doing. So, anyway, getting back to, so I understand when people are skeptical. They have a right to
Mm-hmm.
be because with the internet, which is wonderful, but there are people that just do this to see if they can take money from people.
Sure.
I was very reluctant when I first began telling my story. I had no intention to to write a book.
Right.
Heaven, the unexpected journey.
Right.
That's really what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was approached, someone had heard me speak, and he talked to some friends of his that are in the publishing business, and they came to interview me at a conference. And then they said they thought that I should write a book and they'd be happy to publish it. And I was deeply offended. You know, I'm not one of these people, that that that's trying to make money off this wonderful experience. I'm not. Um, no, unless you're living under a rock in a cave, to do anything in today's world, you need to have an income stream. But I'm fortunate; I don't. And uh, so anyway, I politely refused. At the second day of the conference, they came back, and this time they had the head of the company with them. And they sat down with me and said, "Look, if you live to be 100 years old, you couldn't reach as many people with your ministry, then we can help you reach with a book. And if income is an issue for you, we can help. We can direct you to set up a 5031C charitable organization that controls the funds. You have a vote, but you have a board of directors. And between all of you, you decide where the funds go. And so that's what we did. And I mean, we're not a big ministry, but we have been fortunate enough to be able to help some orphanages in third world countries, and to help with some of the things that are going on to rebuild pediatric units in Ukraine. It's not big, but it's something that we are happy to do. So from book sales and speaking engagements and honorariums and that sort of thing, we have a revenue stream that allows us to carry on that kind of ministry. I despise these people who think they have to, because proof is never enough for some people. No matter how much you tell them, they'll never believe you, and it's a waste of time. But as I mentioned to you before we started the program, for every rude comment or slur that I receive, I get 1,000 thank yous from people who were searching for their faith or trying to rebuild their faith or never believed, and now they do. And all I do is talk about what happened to me. I suppose I am evangelizing, but I'm not out there I'm not counting the number of souls. I always said if I can make one person turn to God, I'm happy. It was worth doing for Jesus.
Yeah.
So but I truly do understand. I wish the rudeness wasn't there, but people hide behind their laptops,
Yeah.
and don't have to face the consequences of their rudeness. But that's fine. Like I said, we are blessed, you and I, to do this. You as a pastor, me as someone that just travels around and talks about my story. And I was able to, I was given some knowledge of things during my death that I think the world needs to hear.
Yeah.
And that's what I tried to do in the book. And I think, given the fact that it's been a bestseller since 2017, and here we are in 2024, I'm being asked to write a second book, and I have started it. As I said, this book is called Heaven, An Unexpected Journey.
Mm-hmm.
My next book will be Heaven, Unexpected Answers. I have 7 journals of memories of what happened to me during my death. And so we're probably looking at a 2025 release date.
Okay.
But I didn't want to be one of these authors that churn out a book every 3 months. Because, that just isn't right.
Sure.
I try to put into my writing things that will touch the hearts of people that long for something else in their lives, and it seems to resonate with people. So as I said a few minutes ago, I was leading a charmed life, and everything was fine up until about 2014, and I just come back from Africa, and my wife's a registered nurse. And I realized that I wasn't feeling well, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I mean, the most I'd ever had was a head cold. But anyway, I wasn't feeling well, and my wife said, and this was a Sunday, and she had gone to church. I, of course, had not. I went out on the boat, and when I got back, I said, I really don't feel like myself. And she said, well, tomorrow is Monday. Maybe you should go see your doctor. By coincidence, my doctor was also my aviation doctor. who gave me my commercial pilot checkovers every 6 months. Um, anyway, I went in to see him, and he examined me on Monday, and he said, I think you have a case of the flu, and go home, rest, drink lots of fluids, and this should pass in a couple of days. So I followed his advice and went home and told my wife, and so I did take it easy for a couple of days, but I was getting progressively worse. And toward the end of the week, I was unable to keep food down, and my hands were starting to curl inwards. And I thought, well, that's unusual. That's not I don't think that's a cold symptom. And so the week went by, and the following Monday, I went back to see him. And he's a little annoyed now because, I got the same thing. And I realize they're busy, but I said, look, I don't quite know how to tell you this, but I feel like my body is shutting down, and I'm having difficulty walking and swallowing. Well, that's not unusual with a heavy cold, and go home and take it easy. And they did blood work, and nothing showed up. Uh, so I went home, and 3 days later, I am so sick I can barely move. And my hands are curling in toward my chest. So my wife put me in the car, and she drove me back to his office. Getting out, crossing the parking lot on the way into his office, I fell down unconscious. Now they pay attention. So very quickly, I was transported to the hospital, and by this time, I was incoherent, and they started a battery of tests, and initially they thought I might have had MS, multiple sclerosis, because of the muscular issues, or Parkinson's, but it turned out it wasn't that at all. And they were a week, because what they didn't realize, and I certainly didn't know, was that I was coming down with I won't say rare, but an uncommon disease. And the disease, many doctors back then, since COVID they see it more, have never seen a case of Guillain-Barré. Are you familiar with it? Guillain-Barré is named after the two doctors in Paris, France, who first isolated the disease, Dr. Guillain and Dr. Barré.
Hmm.
And what happens is the myelin sheath on your brainstem begins uh, to vanish, and all the nerves are exposed, and you have tremendous pain and paralysis. So it's as though all the signals to your body that control your arms and your legs and your hands, and you eventually become paralyzed. And it's a very serious disease. Some people have a mild version, and after treatment, uh, they respond. But that's if they catch the disease in the early first couple of days. By multiple blood transfusions, they take your blood out. When they finally there was a neurosurgeon that turned up, and he said, I think I may know what this is. So they did a lumbar puncture on me to test my spinal fluid. And sure enough, the lab results came back within 3 hours that I had a raging case of Guillain-Barré, and it was destroying the myelin sheath on my brainstem. And I was in a rough way, really, really rough way. Ironically, I got through that, but I was left in a wheelchair and with tremendous pain because the treatment had been delayed so long. And once they started, the disease had such a hold on me that I just had to see if I could survive it. What happens with a lot of people is the paralysis gets to your lungs and you can't breathe and you die. And I was very, very short of breath. I could barely breathe. And of course, they were giving me oxygen and all that sort of thing. And anyway, I did manage to survive thanks to their efforts at that time. And weeks later, I was released from hospital and went home, but I was in a wheelchair and unable to swallow without help. Uh, I still had a trach, um, and it was rough. It was difficult. As I said, Lorraine's a nurse, and it required. I'd gone from a guy that flew jets, raced British cars, water skied, downhill skied, did everything that that guys like to do and gals like to do, and now I couldn't even care for myself without nurses and aides. So, you would have thought that, Hunter, even then I would have raised my eyes to heaven and said, "Hey, God, if you're there, I may not have prayed to you, but can you help me?" Not me, not Diamond Jim. Arrogance, arrogance. And I have to say this with all due respect and apologies to senior pilots like myself. We're guilty of arrogance. Not in a bad way, but you think about that, when you're flying 190 or 240 passengers through a raging lightning storm, surrounded by lightning, and you've got a couple of hundred people sitting in the cabin behind you, completely or 200 people or SOBs sitting behind me, completely dependent upon me. By the way, SOBs are souls on board.
There you go.
You
That's a
are a
clever one.
pastor. And that's how the manifest
Mm,
reads: souls
mm,
on board. And there's a reason for that. Sometimes we'll have three coffins in the baggage area. So, in the event of a crash and they have a manifest of everyone on board, and you have 251 bodies and you only had
mm.
247 then passengers, that means you had four coffins on board. Kind of a gruesome description. But yeah, so
Mhm.
SOBs, for those of us that may be watching, stands for souls on board. I said that one night in a Baptist church in Baltimore, and I thought everyone was going to have a heart attack.
That's something.
But
Hmm.
anyway, they laughed. So anyway, yeah, I was arrogant, and and I so I fixed everything. There's nothing I can't fly, and there's nothing I can't fix. But I couldn't fix this, and it took me almost 6 months to be able to walk
Mm,
again. But I was left with tremendous pain. And then because I couldn't pass the medical to keep my pilot license, although I was getting close to retirement uh, by that time, and I I got a notice from the FAA and from the Department of Transport in Canada that my license was being suspended because I was unable to pass it. And that, Hunter, was like someone cut my heart out with a
mm,
spoon. You know, the one thing that I loved next to my family was my
mm,
flying career. But it was, I was winding down anyway, so it was time. But I tried hard to recover. I exercised as much as I could. I remember the first time without crutches walking around the perimeter of my house outside. We had a horse farm, and I was just elated and sad at the same time because for all the things that I was capable of doing, now I could barely walk around my
mm.
own home. And so it was a wake up call. But again, due to my arrogance, I didn't pray. I didn't ask God for help. I'll fix this. And I eventually got well enough to travel, and I went to various clinics around the world looking for a cure. And there is none. Uh, but I did find a company in England who had a, a trial drug that they were working on. And I, through my doctors, applied to be part of the clinical trials. And it required a lot of legal work because the trials were being conducted in Great Britain, not in Canada. But eventually I was cleared and I received the medication. And it helped. It helped. It reduced the pain by 50%. And actually, there were days when I won't say I was ever normal, but there were days when I felt better than I had in
Mm.
2 years. And so uh, I learned an important lesson. Um, Look, as a pilot, I never drank, I didn't smoke cigarettes. I didn't, I might have a glass of wine with dinner if I wasn't flying, but I never touched alcohol, didn't drink beer. I valued my flying license that much. I certainly never smoked marijuana or did anything like that. But I understand now the slippery slope of addiction because that pain medication that I was on, and it had a number assigned to it because it's not like OxyContin. It was, it was a specific for the Guillain-Barré. And I found, though, that Hunter, like many people do that take pain medication, that the more you take, the better you feel. And I began to do that. And I look back now and think, how stupid could I be? But, pain is a curious thing. If you're really suffering, and I mean really suffering, there's not much you won't do to alleviate that suffering. And so uh, I was taking more medication than I should. Um, Little did I know that uh, this this would eventually lead to my demise. Uh, I was in the process of divesting myself of my companies, winding down my career, and preparing to live a life of trying to manage this disease. And uh, I remember I had some property for sale, and the realtor said to me, the realtors had talked to the engineering company who were writing the parameters for the property. And it was in the country uh, and not too far from our horse farm. I didn't drive much because of my illness, but I was able to get to that property because they wanted me to look at the markers so they could list the property for sale. And so I got there via some back roads through a pasture. And this is where the journey really starts, Hunter. Um, I remember that day in April of 2014, and it was late in the afternoon, uh, almost dinner time or supper time, and I drove into that field and parked the truck. And I didn't plan it this way, but I was facing the setting sun, and I sat there in the truck trying to get the energy up to walk this huge field and look at the survey markers. And I thought, I don't think I can do this. But I remembered that I had some of the medication that I was taking from England in the dash of my truck. And so although I had already taken more than I should have for that day, I took more. And I sat back in the truck, waiting for that wonderful warm feeling of relief from the pain. But suddenly I realized something was not right because it felt as though my feet and legs were on fire. So much so that I looked beneath the dash of the truck to see if there was some kind of mechanical issue, wiring fire. But very quickly I was seized with I had a seizure, and the pain came up my legs into my chest, and then my fingertips and hands began to burn, and the pain came inboard uh, again toward my chest and from my legs to my chest. And all of a sudden, I felt my lungs seize. Um, in that instant, Hunter, from somewhere deep inside of me that I don't think I had been to since I was a young child. I had this overwhelming feeling of sadness, not, and it wasn't fair. I knew I was dying. It wasn't fair. I'd faced death a couple of times as a pilot, never flinched. But I just had this feeling that I had never thanked the Creator. I had ignored Him. And I just wanted to thank Him for the life I had that was now ending, and to ask forgiveness. I didn't ask for salvation. I didn't ask for help me at that point. I just said, I am sorry. I did not make the effort to know you better. And with that, I fell forward and I banged my head on the steering wheel, and I'm done. I'm not quite sure how long I was unconscious in a human state, but I remember sitting back up and I had hit my head on the steering wheel. And I remember sitting back up and I knew time had passed because now the setting sun was right on the horizon. And as I straightened up, I suddenly realized that the pain was gone. I finally got it right. You have to take the whole bottle. And I couldn't believe it. It was as though I had taken off a heavy, wet overcoat, and with it, the pain. I slid out of the truck. I walk about 15, 20 feet away, and I cannot believe it. I feel like I'm 20 years old again. There's no pain. I'm walking normally. I just slid right out of the truck. And as I said, it's an evening in early April, and I can smell the grass. I see the setting sun. I hear the birds in the trees. I remember looking down at the ground, and I thought, that's strange, because it was as though I could see through my feet to the ground. And I thought, well, that's just maybe an after effect of the medication, not realizing I was already dead. And I felt like me, like I used to be before the illness. And then I looked back toward the truck, and I'm filled with anger and rage because some son of a gun is in my truck, my new Dodge Ram. Not only that, he's sleeping on the steering wheel. So I turn to go over there and tell him what I think of his actions. Have you ever had a dream, or have any of your listeners had a dream where something's chasing you and you're trying to move your legs, but they won't move? That's what it was like. But again, because I was Diamond Jim, I can fix this. I thought if I could just get, because I'm stunned, I look at the figure in the truck and I realize it's me. Now, how can this be? I'm here, and yet my body is in the truck, and my head is slumped over the wheel, and there's blood gushing from my mouth where I hemorrhaged. But I still wanted to get over and get in my body and try to make this right. But suddenly, I began to rise from the ground. And here's where I think a lot of NDE stories merge in similarity. And I began to rise, and as a pilot, I'm a good judge of altitude, and suddenly I'm rising above my truck and I'm moving slowly backwards from the truck. And I can see the bed of the truck with my toolbox in it. I can see my body slumped over the wheel through the rear window, and I am absolutely terrified. I'm flying and I'm not in control. And then I happen to tilt my head back and I look, and in the sky above me, Hunter, this beautiful golden ring, about 60 feet in diameter. And the center of it was filled with a golden light. Many, many people talk about the tunnel of light. Now pay attention, because you'll see it one day, as will your listeners, if they honor God. And then my body on its own canted to about a 45-degree angle backwards. And and I realized I'm starting to pick up speed. And then, as though I had advanced the throttles on one of the big jets I used to fly, I picked up tremendous speed and went immediately into the center of this golden tunnel. And I'm just absolutely mystified because nothing makes sense. It's completely silent. I'm a good judge of speed. I've traveled at Mach 1, and that's about the speed I thought I was doing. And inside this tunnel, it's like I'm going so fast, the stars are streaming by me. And I remember I struggled for years to describe that to people, what that sensation was like. And I was speaking in Baltimore one night, and there was a guy in the front pew, and he said, "Sounds like the opening of Star Trek to me." And that's just what it was like, when they go to warp speed. And, uh, and I'm just going through this tunnel. And it was cloud inside, but golden cloud. And I noticed that off in the distance, which was rapidly narrowing, there was an even brighter light.
Mm,
Anyway, let me pick it up.
sure. Can I ask you a quick
So
question,
I
Jim?
see in the, yeah,
So you mentioned, and this goes back earlier, and once you answer this, please continue on with where you left off. But you mentioned that you remembered after you got out of your truck that you looked down and you could kind of see the ground under or like through your feet. Um, the question I
yes.
have is do you remember feeling any different from what just our human experience would feel? Did you feel any like weightless? Did you feel as if you had your body or
Uh,
if it was changed in some way?
it was I could see my body, but it was
Huh.
transparent
Okay.
in a vague way. If I concentrated, I could see through my
Mm-hmm.
feet. And I felt incredibly
Mm-hmm.
light, but with the euphoria of being pain free. There was such a mixed emotion. But yes, I felt different in a great
Okay.
way, better than I'd ever felt in my
Wow.
life. Um, and so anyway, I'm in this tunnel of light, and I'm going at tremendous speed, and then I begin to slow down, and I'm not controlling this. Um, and I come upright from that 45-degree position, and I'm facing, and I still don't know to this day, Hunter, whether to call it a door or a portal. It's covered in mist, and as you would stepping, but I know I have to go forward through that door because over my shoulder I can see the tunnel is closing behind me. And so, as you would stepping into a dark room, because I can't see for the mist, I put my right foot in and feel for the ground, and I felt something solid. So I felt safe enough to bring my other foot in, and I'm standing in this mist, and then the mist dissipates, and I'm looking down at my feet, and I'm still looking through them, but I'm standing on the most incredibly beautiful green grass you could ever imagine. And I mean, I'm just mystified because I've been on a lot of nice golf courses, but this was something different. Every blade of grass had light coming from it. And I don't want it to sound too Las Vegasy. It's not that kind of light, but everything was perfection. And I noticed if I moved my foot, the light rippled out from it. And the mist clears. I look up, and I'm looking at the most incredible vista. And the obvious question from people is, well, what's heaven like? And the easiest answer for me is it's 10,000 times, 10,000 times more beautiful than Earth. But very quickly, as a pilot, I tried to orient myself, and I tried to find the sun because I could tell if I was southwest or northeast or. Um, Little did I know, this is a land without a compass. The only compass is God. Uh, or the ultimate GPS, God positioning system.
That's you're giving me a lot of one-liners that I'm gonna have to use.
And I'm just overwhelmed by the beauty of the place and the flowers and trees that I've never seen before. And I mean, I've been on every continent. I've been in the Amazon. I've been in Africa, but this was different. This was something else. And I could hear birds, and everything was beautiful. And I'm just amazed at how beautiful this is. So I started to look from over to the right are mountains, and my vision had changed. And I was able to focus on a mountain and see the petals on a flower on that mountain, and yet bring my eyes back and look at what was right in front of me. People say that sounds confusing. Look, it was no different than watching TV and texting at the same time. You know, it was just there. And I had this, I call it IMAX, heavenly IMAX vision. I could see not only ahead of me and beside me, but behind me without moving myself. And it was just incredible. But as I moved my vision from that beautiful vista to the left, something dramatic happened. The green grass turned to brown, scorched black, and the dichotomy or the difference between the two vistas, the beauty and light on this side. And when I turned to my left, the darkness that eventually dropped off into a chasm. And people say to me, "What were you thinking?" I wasn't. I was amazed, in awe, frightened, but I've always been curious, and I made my way over because it just dropped off. And I looked down in this crevasse or canyon, and I could see off in the distance, down on the floor of this place, um, a like a dull flickering campfire or red flame. And so I looked down and tried to concentrate on it, and I realized it wasn't a flame. It was a door that was being opened, and there was flame behind it. Uh, and then I heard the strangest sound, the sound of two large doors being pushed open on hinges that screeched and screamed, uh, that had not been oiled in a long time. And as they opened, and they were quite large, I saw a figure come out of there. And to this day, it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Um, I looked at this being coming out, and it was horrific to look at. It was very tall, very large, um, and with very squat head and neck. But the incredible thing was, it was the color of fire, and its body smoked. There was smoke coming off its body, and this thing was big. And but I couldn't see its face. It had its head down, and I realized it was like an animal sniffing for something. And I watched and in horror, and realized that this was something I did not want to see. But I started to back up, and as I did, it seemed to sense the movement, and it turned and looked up toward me. And when its eyes focused on me, the intensity of the hatred in its eyes, for not just for me, Hunter, for all of mankind, was palpable. And it suddenly turned very quick, and for a large creature, it moved very quickly. So imagine this being is on fire. Its body is smoking from the fire. And it started to rapidly climb up that wall toward me. And I reared back from the trying to struggle back when suddenly it came up out of the pit directly in front of me. I fell back I fell on my back and was scrambling backwards on my arms. And this thing was coming toward me. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I started to hear something, and it was screaming. It was, and this is a little confusing. It was not, the sound was coming from the creature, but it was not made by the creature. It was as though this thing had consumed souls, and they were trapped within its body. And it started to speak, and I was stunned to hear it call my name. It knew me. How is this possible? I wasn't that bad a person. I might not have been a candidate for sainthood, but I was not a bad person. I never killed anyone. I never hurt anyone. I was business oriented. But why am I being subjected to this? Which was probably not a very smart question. This is what happens when you don't follow God. And this thing began to speak to me. It knew my name. It knew me. And the best way I can describe this to you is, if a snake could speak, that's what it sounded like. Jim, this is your time with us. We are here for you. Come to us. Come to us. And it was so horrific in its motioning of me to come toward it. It's curious, all these years later, what I remember, the things that your mind focuses on. As horrific as it looked, what wakes me at night is the sound of its saliva dripping from its lips onto the ground. I mean, this creature was big. It was like being approached by a T-Rex, drooling and horrific. In one of the videos on my website, we recreated the creature for the Sid Roth show. And if people want to see what the creature looked like, it's there on Sid Roth's archive. And we worked with a company to create this creature. For pastors like yourself, the old-timey pastors weren't wrong when they talked about hell and all the horrific things that you and go there. And I think we've become, in our modernity, creatures of, how bad can hell be? No Wi-Fi. Believe you me, those old-time pastors weren't wrong. They tried to scare people, and you should be scared. Anyone watching this, you should be scared. This is not some Netflix movie. This is life and death. And without God on your side, you are doomed to this. This is where you end up. And I came within a hair's breadth of being one of those also damned. I spend my life now trying to be worthy of what God did for me, of saving me from that. Because as it advanced toward me, calling my name, the screams coming from its body, I turned my back to keep my sanity. And I looked up toward the sky of heaven on the bright side of the experience. And it was like stars had appeared in the sky above me. And two of them, and then a third one, three of these stars started coming down toward me. And I concentrated on them to keep my sanity. And I realized that they were taking form, and they came from different points. One was probably 030, another one was at 042. And as a pilot, I'm looking at another one's coming from like 280. And I'm just mystified. And then they began to take shape, and I realized they are angels. They are angels. I cried out to God, and God answered my prayer. And a beam of light, when they joined together, a beam of light came from them and shot by me. And I turned in time to see that beam of light hit that demon. And it shrieked and screamed and turned around and ran and scrambled down that hole like a rat running for cover. Darkness and evil cannot exist in the light of God. I turned back toward the angels. I may not have gone to church, but I certainly knew what an angel is. And in amazement, I look at these incredible beings coming toward me, and there are three of them. The first one was about 10 feet tall. I found out later that he was my guardian angel since my conception. Now, that poor angel had pulled an awful tour of duty, and he looked very relieved. I say he, they really had no gender. They had this curious, they seemed to have a gentleness and strength at the same time. And I think that they're just the best of all of us. Um, the second angel was about 13 feet tall, and the tallest angel was about 15 feet tall. And he was dressed differently. He was dressed in a warrior's garb. He had, and he carried a sword. And they came toward me, and every time I tell this, I feel the embrace. Uh, the angel came right up to me, and of course, the short one is 10 feet tall, so I'm looking up. And imagine a being, if you will, that is bathed in light, luminous robes. It looked like they had discovered how to spin cloth from sunlight. And yet, when they moved toward me, their robes moved in cadence to their steps. I didn't see their feet. They kind of glided toward me, but the robes moved. And it was like watching moonlight on the waves of a lake at night, the light pattern. And the first one came right up to me, and I'm looking into this marvelous face, silver haired. And here's something interesting. We all know what a halo is. Well, the spire, his wings were not extended at that time when they came and were gliding toward me. But the tips of the wings came up from the shoulder blades, and the tips of the wings are golden. That creates this golden haze over the silvery hair. And I think that's where we get the idea of a halo. It's a refraction of the light of their wings. And but I think they appear to each of us, maybe in different ways. I don't know. But this just incredibly beautiful. But of all the things that I could speak of about these creatures that live with God, were their eyes. They have the most beautiful violet eyes. Violet eyes. Now imagine something 10 feet tall, how large those eyes are. And the gentlest of smiles. And then I suddenly feel the arm of the angel going around my shoulder to this side. And then he hugged me. The angel drew me to his breast. And then I was conscious of a huge wing coming out around the arm and bringing me in even closer. There I am, cuddled up to an angel. I mean, how can I possibly describe something like this? And I struggled with this for a while. But finally I came up with this to try to give you a sense of what it felt like. Being hugged by an angel of God, Pastor Hunter, is like being hugged by 50 grandmothers at
Hmm.
once. That incredible love.
Yeah.
And then the most amazing thing, I smelled tapioca. Tapioca.
Tapioca.
Now, God has a reason for everything. And I promise I'm not here to start the Church of the Holy Tapioca. I am not. But you see, God knows us so well, and He knows what an experience this is for us to be witnessing His guardians. And so He puts things in front of us that we loved as a child. And when I was a young boy living in the North, I would beat my way home through a snowstorm to my grandmother's home on the 5th of July. And she would have a big bowl of warm tapioca waiting for me. You see, there's a rationale to everything that God does. For some people, it may be the smell of their mom's kitchen, maybe the smell of your dad's workshop, or his pipe, but something that connects you with your childhood. Because right then, just being reborn into heaven, we are His child. We are His children. And so he wants to give us remembrances of what we enjoyed as a child. And and as I'm looking up in the guardian's face, he stepped, he gently released me from his embrace, and he looked deep into my eyes with those violet eyes, and said, "Fear not, James, for we are your constant friends." And now, when you get a letter or a note or an email from me, I always sign it on the bottom, "Your constant friend, Jim."
Yeah.
So there I am standing, and then the other two angels came forward, and they did something extraordinary. In unison, they all bowed to me. Now, this wasn't just a bow of welcome. This was a deep and reverential bow. And they bent right from the waist in front of me. And I felt uncomfortable. I felt I should be bowing to them. And I said to them, I said, "Please, do not bow to me. I am but a man. Why do you bow to me?" And they straightened back up, and my guardian said to me, "James, do you not know that when we look at each of you within humanity, we see the light of our Master within you, created in His image?" Isn't that something? Even these incredible beings, His guardians, do not have what we have. We have the image of God in us. It's not the physical image, it's the image of His light. And it stunned me. And life is hard, life is tough. And I talk to people all the time who say that I, I'm so, I, I don't feel the light in me. You have to allow God into your heart. The picture that I love the best, and I'm sure you've seen it, is the one of Jesus knocking on a wooden door, holding a lantern. If you look closely at that picture, there's no handle on the outside of the door. You have to open your heart to let God in. And He has the utmost respect for our free will. He will never force Himself on us. He will never do that. He has too much respect for the incredible gift of free will. God, Jesus knows better than anyone. Love cannot be taken. It can only be given. And I'm just in awe of realizing that all my life, my arrogance had prevented me from seeing the light of God in me. And then they turn as one, and the warrior angel bows again and says, "Would you walk with us?" And they turn, and with a guardian on either side, and and the tall guardian behind, the warrior angel, this beautiful path appears, and we begin our stroll through paradise. Here's an interesting fact. We often refer to paradise and heaven as one. They're not. Paradise are the grounds outside the walls of heaven. And we were walking toward them, and toward the walls of heaven. And it was just the most wonderful thing. And as we walked, and I realized we're running long, but as we walked, they pointed out things to me and they told me things. I'm, as I said a few minutes ago, I am a curious person, and I asked every question I could think of. And these beautiful birds flying by that I've never seen before, flowers and trees unlike anything I've ever seen before. And even the streams, there was a light that came from them. They flowed like liquid crystal and with light coming out of it. I mean, there was light coming out of everywhere. They told me later that when I commented on the light that even came from the rocks, they said, James, that is sunlight.
Mm. Hmm.
Sonlight.
Yeah, it
Isn't that
is.
beautiful?
It is.
Sunlight, the light of Christ. And so we walk along, and they told me many things, which that's why I wrote the book. But I want to focus on the things that really stood out out of respect for your time. Um, and as we walk along, so remember I said I smelled the tapioca because it was something I loved. Then we come to a split rail fence like you'd see on any farm in Ohio or anywhere in the world. And they knew my love of horses.
All right, so we had a little bit of a cutout there. Those things happen. Technology's great when it works, as we always say. So, Jim, last thing we had there was you were talking about these horses that you saw and sort of how magnificent they were. So please go ahead and pick up with that.
Yes, and so I'm absolutely delighted. I've had horses all my life wherever I've lived, and as I speak, we have horses here with us today. Anyway, these were magnificent, and they came right up to the fence and the white horse. And of course, I had never studied the Bible, so I didn't know at the time that when Jesus comes back, he'll be riding a white horse. And it's amazing the hundreds of thousands of people that have responded, uh, how happy they are to hear that horses are in heaven. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? If Jesus is going to come back on one. So, anyway, I was so thrilled. I put my hand through the fence to stroke its magnificent coat. And, uh, and when I did, my hand went right into this being, this horse of light. And when I pulled my hand back, the most interesting thing happened. The light of the horse's body stuck to my hand till I got it back about 10 inches. And then it let go and went back into the body of the horse. I like to tell people the love of God is sticky, it wants to cling to you.
That's a
And
good
so,
thing to remember.
yeah, so uh, I'm just thrilled, because here's something else that I loved during my time on earth: horses in heaven. And I'm just overwhelmed by the how considerate God is. And so the guardian said, James, he turned to me and he said, hold, touch my cloak. And I held on. And suddenly we're in the air, and I'm looking down. And and I thought I was looking at a large reflecting pool, because it started to shimmer, and then it moved back like waves would. And I realized that I am looking down on the holy city, God's home, heaven, heaven. And I'm just overwhelmed at the immensity of it, and yet the, the beauty and the serenity of it. Um, and I'm looking down on hundreds of thousands of people, more than that. But it was interesting. You could see by the look, and these people had had they're all beings of light, but they had uh, there was something I was seeing and not quite understanding. And I turned to the guardian as I'm holding on, and I said, "Am I seeing this correctly?" Because, with a few exceptions, everyone seems to be young. I see no wheelchairs, no eyeglasses, no canes, no suffering, no pain. And with a few exceptions, I see that everyone seems to be in their early 30s. And the guardian flashed this magnificent smile at me and said, "Yes, James, God so loved the sacrifice of his son, Jesus, that he declared that no one in heaven would be any older than 33 years of age, the age Jesus died." Now,
Hmm.
I know there's no scriptural reference for that, or I don't think there is, but that's what was said to me. The exceptions are the prophets and prophetesses of the Old Testament, and they were very regal looking, uh, gray haired uh, beings of great knowledge, and you could periodically see them, but in general. Then, of course, there were the children.
Hmm.
And the angel pointed out to me the halls of knowledge, the halls of learning, which are two different things, the halls of healing. Having just seen all these people without any hearing aids or any kind of infirmity, I said, why would you need a hall of healing in heaven where everyone is perfect? And the guardian said, James, many souls come to us, as you did, in moments of great trauma and stress. And they need a period of time and reflection to explain to them why their life turned out this way and where they are now and what they will experience going forward. So that is what the hall of healing is. It's for the healing of their soul.
Hmm.
And once they realize that all the people they love, they're going to see again if those people live a life deserving of God and God's ultimate reward, which is heaven. And and so it was, it makes sense. It makes sense. And but there was one building that stood out from all the others. And when I tell this, I can't tell you the effect it has on so many women that have been through this. Uh, there was one building that had an amazing, an incredible green space around it, and there were children everywhere playing with dogs and cats and birds and deer,
Hmm.
and, and so there's a number of things here. Animals in heaven, of course. And I said, you have dogs in heaven and horses. And I said, anything that you loved on earth that had the ability to return the love you gave shall greet you in heaven.
Hmm.
So it's just amazing. And I said, all these kids, I said, are they like kids on earth? And the guardian gave me this look and said, oh yes, very much so. And he said, these are the souls of aborted children or
Hmm.
children who have died in their innocence from disease or accident. God
Hmm.
so loves their beautiful little souls. We gather them back, and they are held here in the nursery.
Hmm.
They age faster than children do on earth because they're not growing a mortal body, they're growing a spiritual body. They age at roughly the 3 times they do on earth. So if the child is 2, they're the equivalent of 6. It's a factor of 3. When they're 3, they're 9. When they're 4,
Hmm.
they're 12.
Hmm.
And then, of course, their families that have come before them are there for them as well. And he said many of the children that come this way eventually end up uh, in, in the nursery to help the newcomers that are coming. And I have to take a moment and tell you about a lady that heard me talk about this in a church in New York City. And afterward, when I was signing the books, she waited and waited and waited. She held back. And then she said, can I speak to you privately? I said, of course. So we went out into the hallway. And she said, Jim, I just want you to know something. She said, when I was 60, I became pregnant. I was forced. And 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 she said my father immediately took me to a doctor in New Jersey. And then I had to wait. And she said, I'll never forget it. She said, every Friday, it was a Friday night at 9:30 at night in this dingy room where I had my abortion. And she said, every Friday night, she said, I'm now 56. And she said, for 40 years, I have cried every Friday night at 9:34 p.m.
Hmm.
for my child.
Hmm.
And she said, to hear you tell me that my child lives and waits for me with God is priceless. And she began to cry. And I've had so many women come to me and say, I had no way to feed another child. We were so poor. I had to have the abortion, and I've regretted it all my life. But I will see my child. Now I believe I will see my child. So this is such an important part of the story, to see the nursery in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed me many other things, but it was just incredible to see the effect that these children, and for a mother to know that when she passes, she'll show up at the gates of heaven, 33, and waiting for them is this beautiful young man or young woman is waiting for their mom to come home. So I we came back down to where the horses were, and I have people say to me, Jim, did you see your mother or your grandparents when you were in heaven? No, I did not. Here's an important thing to remember, Hunter. Once you pass through the gates of heaven, through the two veils, you don't come back. And I think that's why they showed me an aerial view of heaven. And maybe it was because I was a pilot, I don't know, but I never placed foot on the ground of heaven. And I was told that once you step on the ground of heaven, you never come back.
Mm.
So, no, I did not see my loved ones. I wish I had, but I look forward to seeing them again. Here's an interesting thing. Uh, I asked the question of the guardian. I said, but when you lose a child, and it's going to be another 50 or 60 or 70 years before we see that child, or we see our father again or our mother. I'm sad on earth thinking about it. Aren't they sad in heaven? And the guardian said, no, the time of eternity is different.
Mm.
To them, it's like another couple of hours. It's like they're waiting for you to come for dinner.
Wow. Hmm.
And
That's a
and
that's a
and
beautiful testimony.
and you'll be together. And so they're not sad. They're just waiting for you to come for dinner. Isn't that something? So you see,
That's
God,
something.
all of these things that I was told, they're different from what a lot of I don't know why, but I was given this knowledge to pass on to people to ease their fear of passing. The only thing I try to make them remember is to be as kind and loving to people as you can be. Be part of a church. Because the first churches, the first were just gatherings in people's homes in Jesus' time, a sense of community. That's what a church should be. The little church I go to is 34 people. What a wonderful sense of community in this little rural church, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we just bought them a bell for their church. They've never been able to afford one. They're very excited.
Oh, that's great.
Anyway, I digress. But isn't that something? Time is different there. So
And it's what the scriptures attest to. With the Lord, a day is as 1,000 years, is 1,000 years a day.
exactly, yeah.
The Apostle Peter said.
Hmm.
And I think that you mentioned for a moment that some of the things that you experienced, maybe not everyone's testimony has been the same, but I think that I think the Lord reveals different things to different people, like I said earlier, for different reasons. And it's something that I guess we all won't individually know until we all individually get there, if that makes sense.
That
You know.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we all experience God differently.
Right. Right.
There's a common thread, of course, running through all of it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that creates a community. That's what
Yeah.
brings us together as a community. You as the lead, for obvious reasons, to 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 steer us in the right direction, to have us that way.
Yeah.
And I just think it's like I said to you half 40 minutes ago. My heroes are pastors. You guys don't have it easy.
Yeah.
I breeze into town, talk to a bunch of people and leave.
Yeah.
But
It could be. It could be. It could be a lot of work and a lot of difficult work because it's a spiritual work, and the amount of spiritual stress and toll that can take can really wear you down.
yeah,
And you know this more than some other vocations. It's just the amount of mental. Well, Paul even said it. And part of Paul's Second Corinthians chapter 11, part of his distresses and persecutions that he lists. All the things that I've been scourged 3 times, shipwrecked, stoned, all these different things. And then at the end, he says, and among all this is the constant anxiety weighing upon me for the churches.
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
important that he mentioned that as part of his plight, because it's anytime that you take about even to do what you're doing and to tell people your story and to try to bring people closer to God, it there's a great amount of spiritual joy, but there's also a great amount of spiritual um, anguish sometimes, and just spiritual effort
yeah,
that it takes. And we're not just physical bodies. We are spirit as well. And
yeah.
when that side is worked, it's exhausting.
Well, the Guardians said to me, you know, mankind has got it all wrong. You think you're human beings with a soul and spirit. You're not. Your soul's and spirit encased in a human body
Mm,
that eventually dies and turns to dust, but your
right,
soul lives forever. The
right,
trick is, not trick, it's the wrong word, but the key is that you spend it in paradise and not in the darkness of hell.
right. Absolutely. So now take us further. The angels, did
Okay,
they continue to show you other things? Did they bring you to Jesus?
absolutely. So here we go. Here's the whole reason for the big event.
Uh huh.
So we came back down, and I'm standing looking at the horses, and I realized I hadn't seen the tall warrior angel for a while. And I turned to look, and there was a slight rise in the ground, like a slope to my right. And I looked, and the guardian was there, but he was kneeling, and facing him was a figure I had not seen before. It was tall. I couldn't see the face. It was covered in a shimmer, so they were in profile to me. Okay, I'm looking this way. You know how you drive down a hot road in the summertime and the heat shimmers off the pavement? The face of this other figure was covered in this shimmer.
Mm,
But I was intrigued because clearly the guardian was conversing with this being, and the being had, as beautiful as the angels were, this being that I just became aware of, there was a majesty to it, even in profile, and being unable to see the face. It was cloaked in beautiful robe, and the light that flowed off this new entity, uh, it was light, but it behaved like slow moving water, and this gold light flowed off him from all directions. And I watched in amazement that light came down from him, continued to flow from him, and came down that rise toward me. At the same time, I was so intrigued, I was walking over with my eyes transfixed. And I watched in amazement that as this golden light flowed, and as I said, it behaved like slow moving water, even where the flowers were beautiful and in bloom, when that golden light flowed by those flowers bloomed again, even more beautiful.
Hmm.
The light of God. And it came down, and I stopped, and it flowed toward me. And when it circled around my feet, this knowledge came up through me, this feeling of bliss, of absolute completion, that my journey was culminated. And at the same instant, I looked up, and the shimmer vanished from the face, and I was looking at the most regal, beautiful, strong, gentle face. He still hadn't looked at me. He was concentrating on the guardian, and the guardian was kneeling and holding up a book, and this very small, slim book, and was holding it up for Jesus to read, because now the realization came over me: this was Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So I had fallen to my knees, and he was reading this book, and suddenly I was filled with such shame and remorse, because I realized that this little slim book that the guardian was holding for Jesus to read was the book of my life.
Hmm.
No bigger, Hunter, than a small roadside diner menu.
Hmm.
What I thought was the epitome of success as a senior airline captain, with endless ability to buy everything I wanted: planes, a yacht, collection of British sports cars. And all I had to show for my life was this little slim book. And I was overwhelmed by shame and grief. With all the resources I had, I did not. Oh, I gave to charity if I got a receipt. That's
Hmm.
not kindness. That's business.
Hmm.
And I was overwhelmed, and I began to cry. I'll tell you something. If I'm determined that, and I take nothing for granted, if I am allowed to go back, and I live my life every day in hopes of it happening in the next 10 seconds, if I'm allowed to go back, I'm going to go back. And the book of my life, since I had this experience, is going to be so full that Jesus is going to need 4 angels and a forklift to open it. There's a mental image: Jesus on a forklift.
Yeah.
But my point is this: that I've been given that rarest of rare gifts, a chance to make your life better. But to make not just that, to make other people's lives better. And I mean, I just do everything I can to be the kindest person I can be, to do what I can. I drive around this little town I live in with the glove box of my truck crammed with McDonald's gift certificates. And I see a homeless person, I hit the binders and run out and
Hmm.
say, "Here, have a Big Mac. Jesus loves you." Well, I mean, it makes sense. I saw golden arches in heaven. So,
There you go. I
but it's
always thought
just
it would be Chick-fil-A in heaven, not McDonald's, but
no golden arches.
you're right.
I like Chick-fil-A too. But yeah, so, I mean, I'm the happiest guy in the world because I've seen what waits for me. And I'll tell you something: being coming back from death and seeing what waits us if we deserve it is incredibly liberating. I mean, I
Hmm.
have no fear of death, none. I realize that God has given me this duty to perform, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I am so in love with God. I'm the
I
happiest
can't.
guy you'll ever
Yeah,
meet.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine the liberating feeling it would be. You know, a lot of people are afraid of death. Uh,
Yep.
terrified of death.
Yep.
And I think as humans, the reason we are afraid, so terrified of death, is because we find it difficult to process things that we have very little knowledge about. And for us as humans, for humans for thousands of years, that's been one of the big existential questions and issues: is life after death? What's going to happen? Will our conscious move on? And all these things. And so to be able to experience what you've experienced, as you said, I can imagine it would be very liberating and very freeing to be able to live your life in a manner without fear for the Lord.
You've put it very, very well. That's exactly what's occurred to me, or what's happened to me. And you know, I love my family, but I knowing that I know the path to get there,
Mm.
not just the physical path, but I know what to do to
Mm-hmm.
honor God and for Him to bless me by bringing me back. Uh, I'm just so uh, blessed. There's no other word. But you're right, and as a pastor, you see it all the time.
Yep.
People have feared the darkness since we lived in caves,
Yep.
and they have a right to. But you, as a pastor, and I, as a person that travels and speaks of God, uh, there's a way forward, and all they have to do is follow it.
Mm-hmm.
It's superbly simple. It
Yep.
can't be faked. You know, church is not about showing up with the latest car on a Sunday or being dressed the best. That's not.
Right.
I tell people what I like to see in I like to be in a church that has no perfect people,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm far from perfect.
Right.
But by God, I know where I'm going.
Amen. So now,
So
did you
anyway,
did you and Jesus have any interaction?
yes, yes, and I apologize for once again getting off track.
No
So,
problem.
so anyway, I'm looking at Jesus, and the angel closed, and I know it's the book of my life because images are coming off the pages and floating by me. Me as a child playing in the snow, me as a young man learning to fly. These are the stages of my life. So there is a life review. Okay. Anyway, then suddenly Jesus stepped back, nodded to the angel. The guardian closed the book, disappeared. And then Jesus turned to face me. And for the first time, I'm looking at him. Now, I have to tell you and your listeners something. If you want to see what Jesus looks like, look at the latest computer rendition of the Shroud of Turin.
Mm.
Okay?
Yep. I've seen that.
It's it's a it's a match.
Hmm.
It's a match. And I've got another story to tell you at a different time about the Shroud of Turin. But that is the Christ. That shroud this is the face that I saw.
Hmm.
And see, they've used this new software which they use for mapping topographical uh, terrain, and they've rebuilt the face of Jesus from the cloth. Anyway,
Hmm.
that's so.
Thank
and
thank you
and
for that. I appreciate that. That gets me excited to go back and look at that image again, because it's been a little
yeah,
while
and
since I've seen that image.
yeah, and look at and in the '80s, someone said it was a fake. In fact, it wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
because they carbon dated parts of the shroud. But what they carbon dated were the repairs the nuns made to it after it was in a fire. And that's only
Hmm.
medieval times. So the rest of the cloth, now they've proven, is from Israel. Anyway, in the time of Christ. So Jesus turns toward me, and he has the gentlest of smiles. And oh, Hunter, when our eyes met, I know this sounds silly, but when our eyes locked, I felt as though I was the only one God had ever created. I know it. My mind told me different, but my heart told me that. I was that important to him. You will feel the same thing. Everyone listening will feel the same way. So, how can we possibly, with our limited intellect, fathom the fact that God knows each of us intimately and loves us for what we are?
Mm.
All of us, until you turn from Him to the darkness. And and He came slightly toward me, and I'm on my knees, and I started to move toward Him. I had to get closer. In the meantime, this golden light is flowing off Jesus. This grace, I think it is. Grace. And it's continuing to flow around me. And I managed to get to my feet, and I'm reaching out to him, and I take a step forward, and suddenly, and I'll never forget this, he raised his right hand in a definite command to stop. There was no mistaking it. But I'm persistent, if nothing else, and I tried to take another step, and his hand went up even further. And he smiled at me ever so gently. And I went back down on my knees because I was not being allowed to get closer to him. And then he looked at me with those incredible eyes. And then for the first time, I heard his voice. Now, when the guardian spoke to me, it was like telepathic. But when Jesus spoke to me, it was like you and I having a conversation.
Hmm.
And then I heard these words, which is the whole reason we're here today. I heard this beautiful voice say, James, my son.
Hmm.
Still had his hand up. This is not yet your time. Go back and tell your brothers and sisters of the wonders we have shown you. And then his hand came down and crossed over his left. The euphoria of hearing his voice, of him calling me his son, and then the enormous realization that I was being sent back was such a mixture of feeling and emotion. And because it sunk into me, I'm being sent back. And I began to plead, I began to beg, I began to cry. Please, Jesus, don't send me back. Please, this is what I've yearned for all my life. I just didn't know it. I'm sorry, but now I'm here. Let me stay. Please, let me stay. And then I said something I will never forget that made Jesus smile. Please don't send me away. Let me stay. I won't be any trouble. You imagine saying to the Son of God, you won't be any trouble, as if he couldn't handle it.
Right.
What an idiot I am. I won't be any trouble. And he really smiled at that. And then suddenly there are two angels beside me. They lift me up as though on the feather. They turn around and they begin to walk me back down the path. And I struggled against them. And I eventually was able to turn my neck around to plead with Jesus one more time to let me stay. And when I looked back, Jesus had gone.
Hmm.
But standing exactly in the position where Jesus was the warrior angel.
Hmm.
And suddenly he unfolded his wings. I mean, they were magnificent, and he began to glow like a golden creature. And his wings came up like this, like an eagle's wing in flight. And I noticed something. His violet eyes looked at me, and his head went over on one side. And then I heard his voice, and he said, I'm sorry, James, but you have to go. And then
Hmm.
one single blue tear came from his eyes, and dropped onto his cloak. And
Hmm.
like that, I'm in a tunnel. It's not beautiful, it's not lit, it's dark, it's wet, it's cold, and I feel like I'm descending at a high speed.
Hmm.
You know, I shouldn't say this, but honestly, the best way I can describe it is I felt like I was flushed. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because suddenly I come out into my body and I'm on a hospital bed in an intensive care unit. I found all this out later. Uh, uh, that the doctors had told my wife that I had no brain sign and I was on two scanning screens.
Hmm.
The true sign of death is no brain sign. They could make your heart pump, and they had me on a heart pump, but no brain sign. They can tell if you're dreaming, if you're hallucinating, if you've been on drugs. There was nothing flat screened. So that's what caused the both physicians to call the time of death. My wife knew one of them, and she begged them to leave me on the heart machine and to not disconnect me because our children were flying back from the other side of Canada to kiss me goodbye.
Hmm.
And out of respect for her as a nurse, they said, okay, we'll do that. Well, what happened was my wife was in the quiet room at the hospital with her sisters planning my funeral.
Hmm.
And the nurse ran out and said, Mrs. Woodford, come quickly, come quickly, come quickly. And she ran into the intensive care unit thinking that, I had completely stopped and or that the plug had been pulled. And she said, He's 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 back to life. And she ran up to the bed and climbed up on the bed with me. And of course, I'm all wires and tubes. I've got a trach,
Hmm.
and 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 she said my eyes were huge because I'm trying to acclimate from the beauty of heaven to a hospital room,
Hmm.
and and she's kissing me, and I look into her pretty face, and of all the things I could have told my wife about heaven, I said, Lorraine, Lorraine, I saw Jesus, and Jesus has horses because we met on horseback,
Right.
and I'm back.
Wow. So let me ask you a question, Jim. How long were you clinically dead?
11 hours,
Wow.
11 hours, and I had complete renal failure. All my organs had stopped working, and it was 11 hours. And
Hmm.
they had told her that they they tried to resuscitate me, but they told her that to be without to not show any sign of life for 11 hours. And I think it was actually longer than that. That's from the time they had me on the hospital equipment, documenting that I had no brain sign.
Mm-hmm.
So I died in my truck. So,
Right.
and they called a DOA from the ambulance. Um, but anyway, they still put you through the triage here in Canada. So,
Yeah.
and everywhere, I guess. But yeah, so, and so I guess I scared the daylights out of the young nurse that was on that night because she she had been told that I had died, and
Yeah.
suddenly I come off the thing screaming at the top of my lungs around the trach.
Yeah. So how did it feel going from seeing the beauty and the unimaginable glory that you saw to staring up at a hospital ceiling?
The most immense disappointment,
Yeah.
and saying and thinking, "Oh God, why, why?"
Mm-hmm.
And although I had this beautiful experience, I didn't come out of the hospital running down the streets, Johnny shirt flying in the wind, saying Jesus is real. I've recovered very quickly, and my organs all started. So within a week, they let me go home. And but Lorraine was worried because I was sitting at home, and we had a beautiful horse farm, and I could look out my bedroom window at the horses grazing and beautiful blue sky. But everything looked like it was covered with a gray film compared to heaven.
Mm,
Because although there's no sun in the sky of heaven, nor moon, nor stars, light is coming out of everything. Remember what I told you? Sunlight,
mm-hmm.
Sonlight, the light
Right.
of the world. And so extreme disappointment. So anyway, Lorraine was getting concerned about me because I felt depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, in the wisdom that women have, she said, Jim, I think what's wrong is you're not going and telling people about what happened to you. Jesus said to you, you told me, Jesus said to you, go and tell your brothers and sisters. And I said, Lorraine, I'm not a pastor. I haven't trained. I don't know the Bible. She said, you have a beautiful story,
Mm,
and pastors can help you tell it.
mm-hmm.
So I still was reluctant, but eventually she convinced me to go speak at a little country church where the pastor is a friend of ours from Pennsylvania who married a Canadian girl,
Hmm.
a gospel singer. And, uh, and he invited me to his little country church, about 60 people.
Mm.
And I'll tell you something. I've lost, I've had engine failure at 35,000 feet and sweat less than I did standing in front of that church.
Yeah.
I thought I had it all figured out. I thought, well, they'll sing for 20 minutes, and then they'll take up collection. There'll be another 10 minutes, and then they'll preach for 40 minutes. And, with a little luck, I'll be out of here
Uh-huh.
real quick. And Pastor Weaver got up and said, folks, different service this morning. Jim, come on up.
Yeah.
And so I told the story like I'm telling you and your viewers.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened in that little church was miraculous. When I started to speak, it was like something came into me from behind
Mm.
and came into me,
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And I began to speak. And when I finished, that whole church came up and laid hands on me and
Mm.
blessed me. And I realized then the power of this story.
Yeah.
Go and tell your brothers and sisters. And that's what you're helping me to do today. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We just I can't express how thankful I am that you accepted the invite to come on here and to speak with me about this. It's something that when I read it, I was taken back by it in a good way, and just fascinated by it. And I think that it'll further to help a lot of people. And you mentioned about your book and the book sales and things. Um, it's a similar thing with the internet. I mean, it's the, barring anything crazy happening, this discussion will be on the internet for forever. I mean, things on the internet don't go away, and so it's incredible
Yeah,
how God can use us and use these tools and His message and testimonies like this can be spread to generations even far beyond even after we pass. It really is incredible.
yeah,
So
yeah.
um, thank you for all of your work, and uh, I will have you if you'd like to hold up your book again, give another plug for your book. People want to get a little bit more of a detailed reading of it, and that is
This is this is Heaven, an unexpected journey, available from Amazon all over the world, and it's done a remarkable job of telling my story, and I'm so grateful. So it's one man's experience with heaven, angels, and the afterlife.
okay. Thank you for bringing that forward. And also, Jim, where can people find you? Maybe there's some people who are listening who'd like to schedule an appointment for you to come to their church or something like that. Where can they find you to get some more information like that?
Jim Woodford Ministries, and just leave a message for me, and I will get back to you. I promise.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Is there any other thing that you'd like to add from your experience? Anything that you think would be good to end it on?
Uh, well, as I've said to you twice now, my heroes are pastors, so you are my hero. Thank you, Hunter.
I appreciate it, Jim. Thank you.
God bless. Goodbye.